Hello guys and welcome to this video. So today we will see how we can write a unit test. Okay, so we will do a unit test for this app. We built this app in the previous video, so I will strongly recommend you to watch that video first before coming here. Okay, so in the previous video what we did, if you have an invalid email like here, we simply enter John and we click on next. We can see that we have this error message. Okay, and now if we enter a valid email, like let's put john@me.com, and we click on next, you can see that we don't have this error message anymore. Okay, so in this video we will write a unit test for this function. Okay, so enough talking, let's do it. So in order to write a test, what we need is a new target. Okay, why do we need a new target? We need a new target because this target is the one we will ship to App Store. Okay, so we don't want a user to have access to a test, right? Because we want to be the only person to be able to test our app. Okay, our users, they don't need to test our app. Okay, so that's why we need a separate target. Okay, so let's create a new target. Let's come here on File, New, Target, and what we want is a test. We want to search for tests, and here you can see that we have two tests. We can have a UI test or a unit test. Okay, so this video is about unit test, so let's select this unit test, next, and here for the name everything is okay. For the team, none. For organization code we found okay. Make sure that language is Swift, and this project is our project. And for the target we want to test is this target, so our project. Okay, so everything is correct here, and let's click on finish. And as you can see, we have a different target. Okay, we have this target email validation test, okay, which is different from our this target email validation. Okay, and in this target you can see that we have a sample test. Okay, but we won't focus on that now. What we want to do now is to go back to our view model and refactor this. Okay, because we don't want this to stay in our view model. Okay, we want to remove this from our view model. We want to put this in a separate file. Okay, so that it will be easy to test it. Okay, so let's come here, let's come to this target, let's do a right click and create a new group. Okay, and this group we will call it util. Okay, and now in this group what we want to do, we want to create a new file. Okay, we want to create a new file for a test field validation. So let's say we have like many test field validation. Here we only did the email, but maybe we want to also do a validation for a password, for example. Okay, so for the password and email we will put all of them in that test field validation. Okay, so let's come here, util, right click, new file, and we want a Swift file. Okay, next. For the name, what we want to call it test field validation. Perfect. So here we have our test field validation, and we want to copy this function. We want to take this function and want to put it in this file. Okay, so let's do that. Let's create a struct test field validation, and inside this we want to paste our function. Okay, now as you can see we have many errors. Okay, and here we can see that we don't have this email error message anymore. Okay, because we had it in our view model. Okay, we want this email because we don't have the email either, so we want email, and also we want to return this email error message. Okay, so here we will simply pass our email. The type of our email is string, and now for the return, we want this function to return a value, right? Because we want to know whether our validation is successful or not. Okay, so here in our return, what we want to return two things. First of all, we want to make sure that our validation was successful. Okay, and we also want to return this error message. Okay, so the first thing we want to return is valid. So is our email valid? That is a boolean. And the second thing we want to return is our error message. Okay, error message. Okay, perfect. So now here, instead of setting this error message, because we don't have email error message, okay, so instead of setting this error message to empty, to an empty value, what we want to do here is simply return our result. Okay, so here, if this email is valid, what we want to return here for is valid is true, and for error message, what we want to return is empty. Okay, an empty string. Okay, so we can remove this, and we want to do the same thing here. Okay, so if the email is not valid, what we want to return for is valid, we want to return false. And here for error message, what we want to return is invalid email format. Okay, and now we can remove this. Okay, now let's go back to our view model, and what we want to do, we don't want this logic to happen in our view model anymore, right? Because we have it here in our test field validation. So we want to replace this function with this one. Okay, so in order to return this, here we can simply comment out this, and now let's create a new function. We'll still call it is email valid. But now what we want to do, we want to call this function. Okay, and in order to call this function, we want to set this to static. So now that this function is a static function, we can simply call this test field validation, and we can call our is valid email. Okay, and as you can see, we need to pass an email. Okay, and we have this email here, so let's copy this and put it here. Okay, perfect. But now, as you can see, it's complaining because we are not using the return value. Okay, because remember, we are returning this is valid and error message. Okay, so we need to store this into something. So let's call it email validation result. So now we have the result into this property. Okay, so we want to do the same thing that we did here. Okay, so we want to check if email validation result that is valid. So if it's a valid email, what we want to do, we want to set this email error message to an empty string. Okay, so let's do that. So if this is valid, we want to copy this email error message, we want to set it here. Okay, and now if it's not valid, what we want to do, we want to do the same thing here. Okay, we want to copy this and we want to paste it here. Okay, but remember, we already set it here. Okay, we set this like empty in case this is a valid email, the error message empty, but we already set it here. Okay, and we did the same for this here. Okay, so here, instead of setting it again, what we can simply do is come here and do email validation result, and we want to call the error message, and we can do the same for the else branch. Okay, perfect. So now we successfully refactor our function, and we remove the logic from the view model to this file. And remember, we did this because we wanted to separate this from the view model so that it will be easy for us to test this function. Okay, so now before moving to the unit test, what we want to do, we want to make sure that this is working, right? So let's run our app again. Okay, let's see if it's working. Let's enter a wrong email. So I enter John next, and as you can see, we still have our error message. Okay, and if I enter a valid email, boom, the error message is gone. Okay, so we successfully removed the logic from this view model to this util function. Okay, so now let's move to the test. Okay, for a unit test, what I usually like to do is to replicate this structure. Okay, because you can see that here we have this util and then test field validation. Okay, so we want to replicate the same structure here. Okay, so let's come here and create a new folder, right click, new group, and we call it util. And now what we want to do is simply create this test field validation, but we want to add tests. Okay, So let's copy test field validation, come here, right click, new file, and what we want here is a test file. Okay, so we don't want a unit test excuse me, we don't want a UI test, we want a unit test. Okay, so we select unit test, next, and for the name we want to copy this test field validation because this is what we are testing, and we want to add this test. Okay, so test field validation test, next, and we want to make sure that we are in this target. Okay, and we can click on create. Okay, perfect. So Xcode is giving us a bunch of things, but we don't need all of them, so we can simply remove everything. Okay, now let's write a test. Okay, what we will do, we will start by writing a happy path test. Okay, what is a happy path test? A happy path is a test that we pass. Okay, so in our case, it's simply a test that will test a valid email. Okay, so let's come here and create a function. We call it test valid email. Okay, now that we have our function, what we want to do, we want to split it into three main steps. Okay, the first thing we want to do, we want to arrange, and then we want to act, and the last thing we want to do is to assert. Okay, so this is how I usually split all my tests. Okay, so the first thing we want to arrange. Arrange is simply whatever you have to do or whatever you need for the test. Okay, and here in act is the actual test, and for the assert is all our assertion. Okay, and don't worry guys, if this is confusing, we'll go step by step. Okay, so here in arrange, what we said is we need in order to run this test. Okay, so what do we need? Okay, so here, what do we need in order to run this test? Obviously we need this email. Okay, so let's come here and create an email. We will call it valid email. Okay, so this is all we need for this arrange. Okay, because we simply need an email. Okay, so let's move to the act. So act is the actual test. Okay, so in act we want to call this function. Okay, because this is the function we are testing. Okay, so in act we want to call this test field validation, and we want to call our function. So this is valid email. Okay, but as you can see, we have this error message, cannot find test field validation in the scope. So what's happening here is here we are in this target. Okay, email validation test. Okay, but this test field validation is in a different target. Okay, because remember, this target is email validation, and this target doesn't know anything about this target. Okay, so in order for us to use and call this test field validation, we want to import this target. Okay, so let's do that. Let's import our target. So we want to write add test table, and we'll do our import, and we want to import email validation. So now that we have imported this target, you can see that we have a different error message. Now the error message is function is unused. Okay, and this error message, we get it because we are not using the result. Okay, because here in this function we are returning is valid and error message. Okay, but here we are not using it. So let's fix that. Put the result into this property, and we call it email validation result. Okay, perfect. And now you can see that the error is gone. Okay, and here let us not forget to pass our email, because here we are asking for this email. Okay, so and this email is simply this valid email. Okay, perfect. Now we are done for this step, act. So the last thing we want to do is this assert. Okay, and we want to do two assertions. The first one, we want to check that this is valid is true. because remember, in case we are passing a valid email, we are returning this true, and for our error message we are returning an empty string. Okay, so here we will assert two things. The first thing, we want to assert that is valid is true, and we also want to assert that error message is empty. Okay, so let's do that. So in our assert, the first assertion, as we said, is valid. So we want to assert that this email validation result that is valid, we want to assert that is true. Okay, and we can also put a message for us just in case we come back to our code, I don't know, a year after this, and we want to make sure that we understand our test. Okay, so let's add a message for our test. Okay, so for our message, we simply want to say, okay, this is a valid email, so this should return true. Okay, and let's do the same for this error message. In the error message, we want to assert that the error message is empty. Okay, so how do we do that? We come here, we will do the same thing as assert true, but now what we want to do, we want to assert that this email validation result, that error message, we want to assert that is empty. Okay, so we want to say, okay, is this error message empty? Yeah, this is true. Okay, we want to check this error message is empty. Okay, and let's do the same thing. Let's add a message for error message. Passing a valid email, and we should not have an error message. Okay, so now our test is done. So the next thing we want to do is simply run our test. Okay, so let's go ahead and click this. And congratulations guys, our test is passing. Okay, and you can see that this is green now. Okay, so now the next thing we want to do, we want to do the same thing for an invalid email. Okay, and now for the invalid email, we want to assert that, okay, I won't say anything. I'll suggest you to pause this video and try to do the invalid email. Okay, so try to write a test for an invalid email. Okay, I really hope that you have paused the video and did the test. Move ahead and write another test for invalid email. Okay, so we'll come here and just copy this. We want to paste it here, and for the name, we want to test an invalid email. Okay, and here we want an invalid email, so we simply put maybe John at. So this email is invalid, and here we want to still call is valid email. So here we won't change anything, but here for assert, we don't want this to be true. Okay, because remember, in this, if we don't have a valid email, we are returning false. Okay, so here we want to assert false here. Okay, perfect. So, and for our message, we want to say invalid email should return false. And the same goes for here. Here our error message shouldn't be empty, so we want to assert false again. Because remember, if the email is not valid, we are returning this for error message. Okay, so here we want to assert that, okay, this is false, this is not empty, and here for message we want to say invalid email should have an error message. Okay, perfect. So now let's run a test. Okay, perfect. So our test is working. You can see that here is green, this icon is green, and now what we can do, we can simply run the two of them at the same time, and you can see that our test is passing. Okay, so that's it for this video, and I really hope you have enjoyed this video. If it's the case, please like and subscribe to this channel. Okay, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care guys.